Good morning everybody. Welcome to this webinar using Autodesk FormIt for custom design. My name is Paul and I work for a company called Micrographics in Cape Town, South Africa, and it is my pleasure to host you this morning. On the agenda today, we would like to investigate first of all what FormIt is, where we can find it and get hold of it, and how we can learn about FormIt and how it interacts with Autodesk Docs, Dynamo, Insight, Revit, and some plugins and the API. We will focus on some of these topics superficially and then have a look at some practical examples with Revit. So the first item to mention is that there is FormIt and FormIt Pro, and you will see that the AEC collection, which is the Architecture, Engineering and Construction collection, which is a license that's released by Autodesk for a user of multiple platforms. So one user can use all of these licenses. There is the FormIt Pro that is included, and it's only in the AEC collection. So as you can see, the Insight, robot and vehicle tracking platforms, structural bridge design, all of those platforms are only available to you if you have an AEC collection. FormIt, by way of explanation, can be thought of a quick sketch application like SketchUp, which is quite popular within the industry. And although it doesn't function exactly like SketchUp, it's functions on how to draw things, it's how to extrude shapes, that would be intuitive to a user of SketchUp. So if you're comfortable with SketchUp and that's what you normally use, then you should take like a duck to water in FormIt Pro. You can try it out for free. There's a trial version, and you can access that via the Autodesk AEC landing page, and there we can see that we can try FormIt for free if we would like in a trial. By way of introduction, the FormIt platform is available either as a Windows application that will run on your computer, or you can access that on the web if you have a touch screen on a tablet, or via the mouse controls and keyboard, as long as you've got an internet web browser. You can also draw on there. And this of course makes it quite popular with someone that might have a tablet and does most of their job with a tablet. I know some architects that do exactly that, and they use FormIt to conceptualize their designs and to communicate that with their teams. There is the ability to collaborate with others, to show them the camera position and to have a look at whatever you are modeling in real time. There is an Autodesk materials library which will be interpreted correctly by Revit. You can also do a solar analysis, and that's useful if you want to know how much insolation your building will receive. And lastly, there is also the energy analysis, which is essentially Insight, which is also an AC collection benefit, and that leverages the Autodesk Green Building Studio technology, and it's there for guiding you to a design that is better optimized for energy usage. So the FormIt Help links, there's really only one which will redirect you. Will open up on a page very much like the image that you see in front of you. If we follow this link, then you will see that it is a comprehensive one-stop shop for learning how to use Autodesk FormIt and to communicate with others throughout the world via forums, to ask any questions that you might have, or to learn from what others are doing. The FormIt page opens up on the blog page, which will help with typically learning what the software can do, is going to do. You'll see that they publish a roadmap. So there's some great content here within the blogs. There's a gallery of what some others would have done with FormIt. Then we've got the forums. Like most Autodesk software, we've got a community, a forum, where we can either submit an idea or post to forums if we'd like, or search for something. If we go to the forum, then we can see what other people might have asked and answered. You can also search this platform, and on the ideas page, that's quite a useful page to communicate with Autodesk. Are there ideas that you might think the community would vote for? The top voted ideas, which will give you an indication as to what most users would like from the platform. Right, so in addition to the forums, you'll also find this helpful link with respect to the integrations. There's Autodesk Docs, Dynamo, Insight, Revit, and FormIt Plugins and the API. The FormIt for Windows, Autodesk Docs, you can see it opens up this help page. Basically there's Autodesk Docs, which is part of the Autodesk Construction Cloud. It's a data repository online where you can upload. You'll see that Docs license is there. For those of you that have FormIt Pro, you also have the AEC collection, and you'll automatically have access to Docs. And in essence, you can save your files onto Docs and work from them there. So it's a cloud repository for your data, for your files. Then we've got Dynamo. It's prevalent amongst various different platforms, including Revit and Civil 3D and Robot. FormIt also has the ability now to be used with Dynamo, or vice versa, Dynamo with FormIt. And it's a visual programming tool that you can use to build up Dynamo graphs, to generate some geometry, and to parametrically drive whatever massing you are trying to achieve. You might probably use this for massing, and of course you can bring those masses into Revit families and then generate a Revit drawing from there. There is also a Dynamo primer, so they've gone quite a long way into integrating that into Dynamo. There's the solar and energy analysis. Once you've got a massing element or shape that you've designed, you can then do the energy analysis with Insight. So just from a conceptual phase, you will see that there are some preparations for your model that you need to do. You need to have a simple building model, that the solid is solid and watertight, and that the simple building nest needs to have levels applied, and that it also needs to have its location set, and then you can generate that using Insight. It will give you an idea about how well your initial concept will perform. Then we get to what I refer to as the main purpose of Revit, FormIt, and generating some shapes as a designer and then translating that into Revit. And they've changed the interface a little bit from 2019 to 2022, 23, and there are various different ways in which we can look at what's possible in Revit, and we'll have a look at that as well. And again, one would have to spend some time with the platforms to become expert at that. And then lastly, there are plugins, which you can see are already been programmed. That's get from it's essentially apps. And there, excuse me. Then there is also instructions on how to write your own plugins. If you are a programmer and you would like to generate your own plugins, then you can definitely go that route. So the FormIt homepage, very useful. Learning, what's new, the FormIt primer, the FormIt help, and the FormIt YouTube channel if you are looking for further inspiration. The FormIt primer I would like to draw your attention to. This looks to be a very, very good resource, just like with Dynamo, they call these primers. And that would be to run through a typical project that you can set up to generate or to understand how the software works. So if you're looking for a out-of-the-box class, you don't understand how to work with the software, then this would be a good beginning, the Dynamo primer. And you can use that also to learn FormIt, not the Dynamo primer, the FormIt primer, and you can use that to learn FormIt. Right, FormIt is available in two flavors. The one is the FormIt Web, where you can access the software directly on a web browser. You obviously have to sign in. If you have the professional version, if you have the AEC collection, then you can access it from there. Find some plugins. There's a menu. Each time you can see you can save the sketch to either locally or to Autodesk Docs. If you have Autodesk Docs, then you'll have to sign in if you're not signed in, and that will take you to your hub or the hubs to which you have access. You can then switch out into whichever hub is relevant, and you can then save into those project files wherever you have your folder. You can then save something into this folder file, give it a name, and save. You don't need an app, and this will also operate on a electronic device like a tablet, and that's where you can work that from. There's a plugin manager, plugins that are installed, and recommended plugins that you can have a look at to further your workflow with the software. There's also some for the public and for developers. There you can see the properties window, materials window, layers that you might want to set up, scenes that you would like to create. This is also what you'll do with the collaborations, the visual styles, 3D, wireframe, environment, there's some settings there as well. What you'd like to see in the environment area, including the north arrow if you want. If you want to see sky, ground plane and work plane. Okay, so these are layers, those are levels. You can add levels. That's your library, the content library. You can also add, link a folder or add from Autodesk Docs. You can start a collaboration session with somebody else if you'd like. And there we can see that you've got the plugin manager. So all of these are available to you on the right hand side of your screen. And then on the left hand side at the top there you can see some menus. And then we've got undo, redo, select, filter. There we've got, you can see you can choose what to select. We've got primitives that you can create. Now, I was surprised when drawing a cylinder that it is easier to use a sketch tool to draw a circle and then to extrude that instead. There's much more control over the dimensions. You can measure linear distances and angles. Then there are Boolean operations that you can perform. These include joining two solids, finding the subtracting, cut one solid from another. I saw that there's no union command, so it's either join or cut, sweep, slice, or cover open geometry by selecting edges. That's offsetting, shelling. There's a fillet, and there you can connect multiple profiles or edges. Basically like a profile sweep. You can create groups if you'd like to have them similar to each other. If you edit one, you'll edit all. That's the editing group tool. You can make a group unique. In other words, if you'd like to disassociate it and alter it out of the others. You can ungroup elements. You can ungroup everything. And you can ungroup a model completely. Then we've got the solar analysis and the sun editor, shadows and sun, time update. There we can see the solar analysis tool. If you would like to run a solar analysis to see how much incoming solar radiation surfaces will have. We've got our settings. We can snap to a grid, display and enable dimensions, hide, pre-select, highlight. There's a lot here that's going on. The units we can choose, either imperial or metric. We can set the location. Use the search box to find an address or a city. You will need an address. It doesn't exactly have a icon that you put down, so you would search an address, use the search box to find address, city or landmark, select an option. Then we can choose English, of course, and if we'd like to search, then we can say, alright, let's go for where I live, possibly 31 Losbert Crescent, South Africa. That will zoom us into the house, and that will be my location. You'll see that you can move this around a bit once you've sort of generally found what you're looking for. And you can set the location. If you'd like to zoom out to discover the weather stations, then you can do that. So we've got a weather station somewhere in the ocean here. That might be an island. I think it might be close to, not exactly sure where that weather station comes from, but this is another one. And clicking on that element on that weather station, that will display for us the weather that we might receive here. So there's the monthly temperature range. That's the average weather data. There's a wind rose. It shows you that we get most of our wind from the south and the southeast. And then also the intensity of the wind. You can see that Cape Town is quite windy. That might also help you with planning renewable energy if you're doing wind farms, or if you would like to know how to orient the house with regards to the windroses, the loads, structural loads. That's quite important. So this information that you see here is usually available for you within a program called Green Building Studio. And Green Building Studio is the sort of big brother of Insight within the Autodesk stable. But Insight leverages the tools within Green Building Studio to give you typical results. And you can see various windroses. June to August are our rainy times, but mostly you can see south to southeast quite strong. You can import the satellite image and the terrain. That will give you a type of a topography, but note that this will not result in a Revit topography. I'm going to say import satellite image and terrain. You can zoom into the area of interest. So something like that might do. And you can see that that will set the location automatically. It's not super high res, but it's sufficient for you to see that that's kind of what the area looks like. There's a road. It doesn't bring it in like InfraWorks would do as an actual road or anything, but it does kind of give you the context. And also you can see on the north arrow, it's orientated in the right direction, gives you the address. And what they've said is if you look at your layers, you also have the satellite image now. Let's lock that, but we can switch it off. And then there's also the terrain. So if we switch, let's switch off that and switch on the terrain. Then you'll see that it's created a sort of a massing element with a thickness to it. There's sort of a bulge here in this duney type of area that gives you at least an elevation to work from. We're very close to the ocean, so you'll see that we are not very high above sea level. If we measure that, looks to be about, that's quite small. So let's see if we can get this measurement here. You don't have tools like elevation markers, so from that endpoint to that endpoint, we're about 2 meters above sea level here. Right, so we're not too far from the ocean. Very sandy soil, boreholes, fresh water, great for plants and gardens and so on, but also very sandy. And when it does get dry, then it it's kind of not so much vegetation. It does give you a good idea of the context, the elevations, and so on. It's also necessary to do this if you want the I just lock these layers so that you can't move them around or delete them. You can see that the satellite imagery is brought in from Microsoft Bing, and you will need this location once you do the solar analysis, because you would of course have to understand where on the planet you are, as well as which weather station you are going to use for your data. And that would be a good beginning for a project or for a mass that you would like to bring into a family, and then you can bring the family into Revit and then generate a conceptual building from that mass. So that's one of the ways in which FormIt is used. Unfortunately, you can't just bring a FormIt model into Revit and then treat it like a massing element from which you can do the same. You first have to bring that model into a massing family, and after you've then created the family, then you can import the family into Revit and create the massing element. So that intermediary step of loading the FormIt model into a Revit massing family tells Revit that it must be a mass. The other elements that you'll import, if you had to set this up as a typical model, the other elements that you import will act as CAD objects or three-dimensional objects. There's not much that you can do with them, but the families, they will behave appropriately. So there's a bidirectional or input-output mode, I would say, from FormIt into Revit or from Revit into FormIt, but they are not exactly compatible with each other. They don't recognize the same components. You can't draw something in FormIt, for instance a column or beam, and then tell Revit that it must recognize that it is a column or a beam. It doesn't see it that way. So it's more a conceptual tool, sort of like you would think of SketchUp, but it's the Autodesk equivalent that you can use to interoperate with Revit in a way that is closer to SketchUp. But step number one, I would say, set your location up, make sure that you have the right context for your conceptual model. We'll put it there or thereabouts with respect to the coordinate system. You'd obviously have to do that within Revit as well, but that is the beginning of the project. Alright, so now that we've got our site, we'd like to start drawing on it. We don't know the height at all, so let's try and figure out what a good level would be here. I think an easy way to do that, or one of the ways in which I've managed to do this, you'll see that if you right click on open space, you get given the opportunity to either set some axes to work with, or to also reset the axes. So reset axes, that would be the global position, or you can also then choose an axis. It will recognize this mesh face that the so-called topography consists of. You can select the point on there, and then the red axis, it's RGB. Red is for X, Y is for green, and Z is blue. Then clicking on the red axis, you can rotate that element by. The Y-axis gives you the ability to choose a point to orientate the Z-axis to. So that will probably incline the axis. So I wouldn't actually do that. So remember, you can reset, or you can select, place the origin, use the X-axis, rotate that, That will keep them orthogonal to the world axis. That will then give you a position to start sketching from, if you'd like. You might have to redo this a few times to get used to it, and then all I'm going to do is just generate a circle, and then you'll see how that circle is generated on that axis. You can control the radius of a circle as well, and then escape, click on that circle, and then you can just drag that up as a cylinder. So that's easy enough, drawing on that surface. But again, we don't really know what that elevation is, right? So you can set up levels. I've got a sort of a decent 3.5 meter interval representing the heights of floors from each other, but you can add a level. If that's added at 0, add another level. I'm going to make that 2 meters, add another one at 4 meters, add another one at 6 meters. Level 1 is at 0, 2, 2 meters, 4 meters, and 6 meters. Alright, and now you can select that element, click over it. In the properties, you'll see that you can select layers to apply to it. So there's the the layer being the sort of layer, but you've also got your levels. It gives you a volume, and then if we say use levels, then we can choose which levels to use, and for each one of those it will give us our square meterage on that. So now I can measure from this level, it snaps to that level down onto the bottom there, and I can see that's about 620, and that's 6 meters, 4 meters, 2 meters, and we said that is around about 620. So that would be 4 meters minus 2 meters minus 620 gives us around about 1380. Right, so then we'll change that to 1380. That's our first level, 1380. Our second level, that's 3380. Our fourth level, it likes to input these things in meters, unfortunately. Let's make it a 3 meter interval. That will make that 4. Next one is 7380. And the last one is 110,380. Right, and there we can see now that we have our height above sea level, and they're getting generated correctly. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, and there are our levels. Right, so we've managed to use some geometry and some levels, as well as the fact that we can snap a coordinate system onto a mesh to be able to work out what our height above sea level is. So what I'd like to do now is to snap the coordinate system onto that level so I can work on that. So I can say reset axes and then select, and as long as I can zoom in on that level, you'll see you can snap to that level. Right. To stop myself snapping to the topography, I'm going to switch off the terrain, leaving myself just with the satellite imagery. And you'll see I'm also snapping onto this grid. And the grid snapping you can switch off. If you go into the settings, you'll see that you've got snap to grid, which you can switch off. And now you can sketch some more of the shape. You can see how it likes snapping to perpendicular. That will move. You can scale elements. Alright, so here I've got two lines that I want to join to each other. You'll see it's also kind of intuitive. You can right click on that element and use the scale command. Kind of move where it's scaling from. Select that as 200%. And what that does is where it crosses another line, it creates an extra line which you can of course delete. If you do the same thing on this side, and we right click on that and we say scale, choose the direction, that's going to be 200. So, and there we can see where they cross, they delete each other, and now it is a sort of closed element. If you tab to select those elements, then you should also be able to create a mesh from that. We don't want to move that element. Okay, so to create a surface from these elements, you would select them and then use the advanced modeling tools to create cover geometry. Finish. There we can see the surface, and then once we click on the surface, you'll see that it's got a command that kind of you can just draw it up like that, and you can also type in the distance that you would like to go. So I would say 369 meters. Comma. Okay, and there is our cube of 9 meters. I've opened the model in the desktop version of the app. The file can be opened directly from Autodesk Docs, where we've saved it with the web app. Now we can perform some analyses here. You can see that you can switch on the sun. You can have the sun editor as well. And we can do a solar analysis. We can select the faces or objects and then analyze, and there we can see the results. We are in the southern hemisphere, so you can see the purple faces of this building will get less incoming solar insulation than the roof and the north and western faces, and so those would be good surfaces to plan for solar panels and alternative energy generation. Now, although this isn't a much developed model, we should also be able to generate an insight. Like we said, the green building studio is the underlying technology. This then runs the simulation. Takes a little time for the analysis to run its course, after which we can then view the results. And this then gives us a good indication about what we should do with this building, or what we can do with this building. You can navigate the building, see what that would look like, alter the composition. And we can see the target, benchmark comparison, according to the lead goals. They're not the green, the rating that we use in South Africa, but it's a good indication of what you can expect. And there you can see the settings that have been applied. So this will guide you to a better design from an energy efficiency perspective. This is great for conceptual modeling. Now, unfortunately, this model will not behave like a mass within Revit itself unless you take it into a family. To demonstrate that, you can bring a FormIt model in through the insert link or import CAD. We would be looking for an AXM file, and in this case it would be within our Autodesk Docs directory. In the correct folder, does not recognize FormIt mass, the file that we are working with. There's our FormIt mass. We are working in millimeters, we know that, and we can open that file. Right, so linking does work, and we can see the result. It looks a bit small. Let's have a look in 3D. Yeah, it does look very small. So it interpreted the building probably as meters and not as millimeters. Let's try this again. Can of course manage our links. It will be within CAD. We can remove that completely and link it in again. This time let's go with auto detect. And there we can see it now looks to be the right size. However, when we go to the massing Insight, we'll see that we cannot create a roof from this element or a wall by face. It does not recognize this element as a massing element. I'll demonstrate shortly how we would achieve that. So we would have to start in Revit by creating a new family from the conceptual massing family template, and then we would insert the FormIt mass, can do a full explode. You can see everything is exploded. Let's see if a partial explode works. No. And so we'll see that especially with the topography brought in, this doesn't behave as expected. Let's quickly save this. So one must just be very careful of how one plans the workflow around the Revit model. Alright, so this is now a family. Again, let's have a quick look. Can we recognize that? Can we create a wall by surface? And in this case, yes. Alright, so there you can see how you can now use this shape, whatever you've modeled, as a massing element, because you have brought it in as a massing family. Alright, and switching that off, you can now see there that we've got our wall elements that were created from that mass element. Unfortunately, the topography, let's have a look if we can create a topography from that import. That would also be interesting. If we try and create a topo surface, we'll see that it does not recognize this. Let's try and import, select import instance. It says there are no imported elements in your document. Please use the import tool to import the desired objects and then add them to the site. So we can't expect the topography that is in the background to generate correctly, but it does give us some sort of context for where this model is occurring on this site. It does show the texture of the neighborhood, and that is how we could work with that. So while we've only scratched the surface of the interaction between these two programs and the other platforms out there like Dynamo and so on, I would like to mention something that I discovered in response to a question to specifically structural engineers who would typically like to model some interesting shapes in a SketchUp-like environment, and then to generate pump stations and other sorts of forms from that. But unfortunately, FormIt does not extend itself to generating every type of family that you find within the Revit library. You would rather, or it only extends itself to massing families, and it would not be suitable for custom concrete shapes. Instead, you would have to model that up within a Revit family. So the workflow wouldn't extend itself to use FormIt for custom concrete shapes and then bring it into Revit to generate it from there. So don't expect Revit to be able to do that. Then they've changed the interface with Revit a bit in the add-ins. You'll see that you can convert something to FormIt. There is also a library location that you can set so that FormIt can access these libraries. So there we can see that we've got, we don't want to have too much for the computer to process, so we'll just go with the webinar folder over there in the families. We've put some in there. That will then convert those families into families that FormIt will recognize. If we want to use those families within our FormIt design, it's also recognized by Revit. The typical conceptual modeling that you'll be doing within a FormIt file wouldn't be interpreted otherwise within Revit. And we'll wait for that to complete. If you had a large library, that would take a long time the first time you do this. You can also take elements out from the model itself with this 3D sketch tool, the FormIt. Now you can choose launch it with all the visible Revit objects or just with selected Revit objects. I'll go with everything and see how it interprets that. Right, now this gives us our context where we can carry on and model elements. And we'll see that some of the families that were converted for us are also available to us here. So if we wanted to place a desk, we would be able to do that. There are materials that we can paint with. Obviously not the Revit elements, but if we did model up a cube or something like that, then we'll be able to paint using the materials. And that will also be recognized by Revit. Once you take that back, there we can see the element going into realistic mode. We should see the texture comes through nicely. As well as the furniture, but it does not represent itself as a Revit element as such. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this short introduction to the workflows between FormIt and Revit specifically, but also to the rest of FormIt. If it's going to help you within your architectural practice, it's a good tool to adopt. FormIt Pro is available on the AEC collection. And best of luck with whatever you attempt in your conceptual modeling before developing the Revit model proper. Until next time, enjoy your Autodesk software.